Cordovez with Adam Schoenfeld. Welcome to The Scoop. We're here at Bellagio. Now, before we met, when we were playing with Bones Berland and Jesse Alto and these guys, you spent a number of years at the Princeton Institute with Albert Einstein, John von Neumann.
I was at the Institute for Advanced Studies.
Right.
But I was a janitor there.
I was going to say that a lot of people felt that those guys ripped off a lot of your material and ended up becoming world-famous scientists and philosophers. But actually, no, you were just in the janitorial department?
I said to von Neumann, look, you got the equation all wrong.
Right.
And then that's how the whole field of game theory was born.
You were doodling on the blackboard, and then he came in and just
he expanded. He expanded, in fairness.
What's funny, and we joke about this, is that these days, you really do have a lot of sophisticated thinking going on. Not that thinking was sophisticated, but it wasn't really formal. I mean,
it's codified
early
now.
Poker guys, they understood a lot of stuff, even if they didn't necessarily have a way of articulating it, or even if there wasn't a reference in the culture, the literature. Their instincts matched up to that without even realizing it. Now we actually have camps where people are talking about game theory and other advanced modeling that can apply to poker and all sorts of stuff.
I'm against
What's going on?
I'm against it, but our guest today is...
What would Bones Berland think of this?
They didn't like this back then.
So Vanessa Rousso, I saw, is one of these players who's doing a lot of this type of thinking, and we'll see what she's got to say.
Okay.
But you'll be quizzing her and checking out based on your
I'm going to
experience.
put it to the test.
All right, good. We had Bill Chen on, who wrote The Mathematics of Poker, who's a poker PhD. You've been doing the art and science, or where art meets science in poker. What is the intersection?
I think you're talking about the clinic I did yesterday on game theory and poker. The reason we called it Where Science Meets Art is that game theory is, it's a little bit of math. There's definitely math in it, but it's more of a science because you actually involve the analysis like evolutionary analysis, like Darwinism, survival of the fittest. There's a lot of that. In fact, my entire intro for the first 2 hours was pretty Darwinism heavy. And so that's the science part, right? And of course there's a little math in that. And the art part is the art of poker, because you have to take into account, poker as a game has a lot of particularities, things about it that make it a very unique type of game. And there's really an art to understanding the game of poker. And once you take the game theoretical background and put it together with experience at the poker table, I came up with a curriculum that I taught yesterday, and it went over really well. I think the clinic went very well. I was very happy.
When I think of game theory, I think of John von Neumann and Prisoner's Dilemma and all the kind of logic approaches to competitions and to situations. But what is the application to poker, or how does your approach differ in terms of the evolution and other aspects of game theory?
It's a good thing you brought up the Prisoner's Dilemma. That's a huge part of game theory in general and of my clinic. The way we broke it down was that we first taught the Prisoner's Dilemma in generic form. Then I tried to make the Prisoner's Dilemma real for the students by showing them real-world examples of the Prisoner's Dilemma. And then we tried to bring it home with poker. And just to give you a quick example of one really easy Prisoner's Dilemma to understand, but this is by no means the most important or the most central one, checking it down when a third player is all in at the poker table, that's actually a Prisoner's Dilemma. It's a way that in the poker community, we've evolved to cooperate, actually, which is like the only time you can really think of where poker players are cooperating, because it's in the collective interest to eliminate that third player and get one person closer to the money. That's an example of a Prisoner's Dilemma in poker.
When Bill Chen was on, he actually talked about other situations, too, where people are collaborating for their own interest, but collaborating. And he brought up the example of someone on the button in Hold'em. If they raise, the small blind can re-raise to isolate against the button, or they can call, and now they're bringing the big blind in, and obviously they want to win the pot, but they're manipulating the situation against the button by letting the big blind come in. If they raise, they're manipulating the situation to eliminate the big blind. So there are a lot of situations, and he's written a whole book about it. The evolutionary stuff that you talk about, maybe I'm not as familiar with that, but how does that fit into what's happening in poker as far as nature and Darwinism?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time in the clinic talking about how different tournaments are actually very different poker communities. And once you learn and understand the nature of your opposition, the nature of the community that you're facing when you enter a particular type of tournament, be it a small buy-in tournament, a World Series of Poker style tournament, a World Poker Tour style tournament, a big buy-in tournament, a 3-day event versus a 1-day event, all these things affect the nature of the style of play you can expect from the other players at the tables. And so once you understand how to first predict the nature of your opponents that you will likely face at the table. Then we talked about how that should affect your optimal play in a broad sense. But then, of course, one of the cool things about poker is that the game of poker is actually a hierarchy of games, right? It's not just the tournament itself. There's actually the game of a particular phase of a tournament, the game of a particular table at a tournament, the game that takes place during a single hand of a tournament, and the games that take place during any conversation or any single betting street. All of that are little sub-games within the larger games as you approach the larger hierarchy of the game of your tournament career, which is the biggest game. So we spent some time talking about all the different games you'll play as a poker player.
I read some of your stuff online, and you were talking about different strategies that have evolved, different exploitive strategies. Even in the past year, you were talking about how the nature of players has changed and your strategy has changed. Can you flesh that out a little for me? Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think you're talking about where I said that, look, we have some information, right, about how players are likely to play the tables. Over the course of the last few years, there's been a lot of books published, right, especially Harrington on Hold'em.
Right.
It's a really, really popular book.
Very
and
influential.
It's very influential. In fact, it's the strategy therein has trickled down and become commonplace to the point that actually during my clinic yesterday, we played this one game where people attempted to describe one truth they know about poker strategy. And a lot of the truths that people thought they knew about poker strategy were adages and idiom, different statements that came from Harrington on Hold'em. Right. And so that shows you just how far the influence has gone, because some of these players had never actually read the book. They just heard from someone who heard from someone who read the book. But so that's why it's important, even if you're not going to read these books to influence your own strategy, once you're aware that this is what's influencing everyone else's strategy, then you read them for that purpose, and then you say, now that I know that everyone else is playing it this way, how should I play? And I go through a lot of specific examples. We wouldn't want to give them all away right here. But
one thing that I think is like the most perhaps overused strategy from Dan Harrington's book is the squeeze play from out of the blinds. And so now you're saying that perhaps you'd be more likely, if you had pocket aces in one of the blinds, you'd want to make it where normally you wouldn't put in the all-in raise there because you're hoping for some action, but maybe you would now because it's going to look so much like a squeeze play that everyone knows they're going to call you.
You brought up the perfect example, and I'm going to tell you how I addressed this in the class yesterday. Absolutely, the squeeze play is tremendously overused, probably tremendously overused by me. And so I guess I have a reputation of being willing to put on a squeeze play, especially out of the blinds, if people put on weakness. And I'm going to show you how another fellow pro player actually took advantage of this against me and helped me realize what the best way to play this is. If you know that someone's in the blinds who is willing to put on a squeeze, and you see the situation forming where it's likely they'll put on a squeeze, it's actually advantageous to, albeit risky, you have to be willing to get away from it. If they don't squeeze and the flop is not beneficial to your big hand, you have to be willing to get away from it. But what Bill Edler did versus me in the Borgata 10K back in February, a mid-position player made a weak raise, and he had a big stack. It was so, couldn't really give him that much credit. He was putting in a lot of raises at the table. Two other people called behind, and Bill Edler in very late position puts in a seemingly weak call behind, and I'm in the big blind with ace-10 suited, and it looked like a good situation for a squeeze. Right. I put on the squeeze, and if the first guy folded, and I'm like, oh, the squeeze is going to work, because normally once the first raiser folds, it's a domino effect. You don't have to worry about the rest. And gets to Bill, and he's like, I call. And I was like, what? What do you mean you call?
That's unfortunate.
And he had queens, and so I think. He knew
That's
he was
really
going to have one.
Queens
It's pretty
too.
risky, but it's smart. It's a really smart play. He knew that he'd play with me so much, and he knew that it would be my tendency to put on a squeeze play there, and he trapped me very well. And that's an example of how you can use the information that's available to you at the poker table against the other players.
You've got to know your player. In the old days, before you were born, this guy named Noel Furlong won the main event, and he was a maniacal, very aggressive player. And I played with him in a World Series tournament, a preliminary tournament. And he was in the small blind. I was on the button, and I actually got pocket queens on the button with like 4 people in, and I was so 100% certain that he couldn't resist this that I just called, knowing that he was disciplined enough to lay down, but he couldn't resist 5 people in ever. And sure enough, he just went all in, and he had like a jack-6 or something. But once you know the player, you adapt to them and you take advantage of their...
that same scenario, I actually did the same thing. I did what Bill Edler did actually versus Barry Greenstein earlier in my career at the World Championships, the 25K in 2006 on day 2. it folded to me, and I limped on the button with aces, and because he was notorious for coming out of the big blind with a big raise, and his raises are really big, so you actually get a lot of value, and so I did get a lot of value out of that. That was a good play. So yeah.
You talked about the hierarchy of tournaments. Obviously, the King of the Hill is the main event, which is just getting underway right now. Everyone's been waiting for it. What are some of the particulars you think of the main event? I don't know if you've played in the main event before.
Yeah, I played last year. Yeah.
What are some of the differences of the main event, which is kind of a unique tournament in terms of its length, in terms of the field?
Well, you know, like I say, I made it to the end of day one last year, so I haven't played in the later stages of it. So it's going to be kind of a test to see how well I can adapt to things as I come across them. From what I hear, I think that you should be expecting a lot of weaker players, which means you probably don't want to be, as long as those weaker players are still in the field, you really don't want to be trying any complicated moves, because one of the things about poker is that you're constantly struggling between the urge to deceive your opponents and the want to show your opponents that you're cooperating and that your bets do indicate the quality of your hand in order to have credibility, because you can't pull off the moves that you need to do to deceive your opponents without some version of credibility. And so, one of the ways that you can start to build that credibility is you just show the stronger players who can read your moves that your moves actually indicate the quality of your hand. Problem is, with some weaker players, they don't necessarily know, they just haven't had the experience to be able to tell what moves should indicate what type of quality of hand. So it's tough to tell the story that you need to do in order to pull off
a big you're
play.
Speaking foreign language in some cases that the weaker players might not understand.
Right.
What I've found so far in the World Series, and I've played only a handful of events, is in past years, if you came across a table of people that you didn't know at all, it was super easy.
That was a good thing.
Now, if you come across a table of people you don't know, it's all like internet whiz kids who are super good, and so it's a whole different thing.
Especially if they're speaking Swedish or Norwegian.
The Finns.
Yeah, definitely scared of the Norwegian players.
It's the Finns. Paavo Nurmi was at my table, flying in. But now, in the main event, I think it switches again, because if you get a table full of unknowns, the chances are it's diluted. The Finns are not that many. There's only like 18 Finns in the entire world anyway. So now the players you don't know may be more exploitable starting tomorrow.
It comes down to marketing. If you think about it, the way the World Series of Poker is marketed, it's very different than like other main events, like on the World Poker Tour, or even the World Series circuit. It's different. The main event has kind of been glorified as something that it's sort of that American dream incarnate. You can come and all your dreams can come true if you get lucky for a few days. And so when it's marketed that way, you're going to get some people who poker's a hobby for them, or maybe they're just total novices. It's similar to like a kind of expensive lottery ticket, I guess.
Well, also, that also brings up kind of a psychological effect, which is that for a lot of those guys that you're describing, it's important to last, at the very least, just to have a story, as opposed to going out in the first hour. A pro is really going to care if he does go out early, if it was the right move or not. But if this is the only tournament you're playing the whole year, and this is the dream, you don't want to go out in the first couple of hours. You want to go out with a legitimate hand or against a legitimate player. So it changes a lot of the play just based on
I think that's
why people are playing. They're not all playing to win or to maximize their hand at the moment. They're playing partly for the experience.
Yeah, definitely I agree with you. I think in addition to that, one of the things that takes place is that $10,000 is a lot of money to everyone, and especially to people who aren't used to the big buy-in tournaments where they're going to be making a return on their investment that justifies these sort of buy-ins. And so if you're not like a regular player and you're ponying up $10K to play the main event, you definitely want to at least get kind of your money's worth. Yeah, and that's the other reason why going out on the first hand, it would be like, well, that was a really expensive hand.
You don't want to go back and think, boy, I was paying $5,000 per hour. At the very least, you want to feel like you got your money's worth one way or the other.
Vanessa, you're in law school now?
Yes, one more semester.
Can I ask you a couple of basic questions? Can you describe to me the elements of a contract in brief?
The elements of a contract. Sure, you have an offer, an acceptance, and consideration.
Correct. See, perfect. I just want to make sure she's really in law
school. He's testing me.
This is part of establishing credibility. Like
what would be your definition of a tort?
What is a tort?
Yeah.
It's when you do wrong against someone. It's actually a very vague term.
I call it an illegal touching.
An illegal touching?
I think that's the law dictionary definition, yeah.
All right, well, no, because
but you gave an acceptable answer.
Actually, I can show you no, because you have the tort of intentional infliction of emotional distress.
Yeah, but it's touching in the broad sense.
Oh, but touching in okay.
Now, you wanted to show
your reading material.
Yeah, what are you reading now?
This came out yesterday. It's Chad Brown's my boyfriend. He's so cute, right? Act to win in Texas Hold'em poker. The whole like plan where it's act to win.
Because Chad's an actor and a great poker player.
Look how smart you are.
You know, we're friends with Chad, and we didn't get books.
Yeah, I'm waiting for my free copy.
Yeah.
I'm sure he'll give you a copy. Signed even.
All right.
Actually, you know what? He'll be at the expo sometime tomorrow doing signings and giving them out at the World Poker Tour Boot Camp booth. So.
And Chad's still in the Deuce to 7 right now, doing quite well.
Yeah, actually, he's down to 17 players, and first place is over $500,000, so cross your fingers.
That'd be very nice. You can hold it up again. This is probably a very good book. I look forward to it.
And actually, Chad's had a great World Series. It's his 7th, well, if he cashes in this one, which it looks like he will. It'll be his 7th cash and 2nd final table, which would be pretty huge.
We'll have him on the next couple of days. He was going to come on, and then we had some conflict, so we'll bring him on and we'll check with his knowledge of legal terminology as well.
So
make sure to prep him because we're going to ask him about all sorts of other topics. Thanks for joining us on The Scoop. Vanessa, thanks for coming by. We'll see you tomorrow.